We will go to the full extent, depending how far this goes. We will go to the extent of cutting off their energy, going down to Michigan, going down to New York State, and over to Wisconsin.
Okay, so that was Ontario Premier Doug Ford back in December when he threatened to cut off Ontario's energy flow to the United States to deter tariff threats from U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Well, Ford now appears to be softening, adjusting, tweaking that threat, pitching a deeper energy alliance with his province.
Fortress AMCAN is a renewed alliance between America and Canada that's a beacon of stability, security, and long-term economic growth on both sides of the border. A true partnership where Canada and the U.S. align on shared priorities.
Stephen Lecce is the Ontario Minister of Energy and Electrification, and he joins me now. Minister, it's good to see you in person. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So, look, a month ago we talked, and you were threatening to cut off the energy supply to the United States. Now you're pitching further integration. Is this a climb down by Ontario, or is this the carrot to go with the stick?
I think more to the latter. I think what the Premier is saying is there's a clear preference for continental energy security. The U.S. congressional leaders that we've spoken to for the past several months have come to us looking for more energy, looking for our critical minerals and rare earths. They're looking for access to some of Canada's bounty when it comes to our natural resources. That is our value proposition from a national security and economic prosperity perspective. So we've built a plan, this AMCAN, this Fortress AMCAN, the idea of this continental approach to energy integration, giving preferential access to the Americans where they need, given that China has made clear that China and their proxies will be decoupling from the United States. So it is in the U.S. interest, based on American advice, and I believe this is a better way forward. The Premier believes this too. But I just want to make clear, though, on what we talked about a month ago, if the U.S. decides, and should the federal government not be able to dissuade the president-elect to drop this 25% tariff, then we will respond with force in the defense of our jobs and our supply chain. But it's just not our preference. We really want to work together with the U.S.
Just on that point, because the energy you're talking about is the electricity that Ontario generates that you sell into the U.S. market. But there are principles such as reciprocity under the FERC rules, you know, that power has to go back and forth and done in good faith without interruption if you want continued access to that market. I mean, you're potentially running afoul of pretty big regulatory costs and challenges should Ontario make good on this threat, are you not?
Look, when you're talking about a 25% tariff, that is fairly existential for our manufacturing and our resource base. I mean, this is hundreds of thousands of jobs that be in peril and billions of dollars of trade. So if they're launching a trade war, then we must respond in kind with speed and with force. What I will say, though, on energy is 7% of Ontario's electricity generation is going down into the U.S. to 3 principal states. We have the interties, the infrastructure that's already there. Right. Part of this Fortress AMCAN strategy is actually about leaning in and working with the United States to build out our infrastructure, to expand our interties, to actually ensure that more Canadian clean, non-emitting energy could enter the U.S. market. So we'll respect our obligations, but let's be very clear. Should they proceed with this significant tariff, we need to send a signal. And one of the tools, the Premier has not committed to that is the one. He's just simply said
it's a big one.
It's a big one in the toolkit. And in the coming days, the people of Canada will know based on the decision of the U.S. But our hope is that the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, is working with the President-elect to dissuade them based on the 2 priorities of border security investments, to end the illegal migration of people and the smuggling of illicit drugs and guns, and likewise increasing of defense spending. Look, David, if they can table a credible plan, we should be able to avert the tariff. But the Premier does believe it's possible. It's likely these tariffs are coming, and thus we must be ready.
Right, but I wonder, look, when we last spoke, it was, okay, we need something on fentanyl, something on migration, a commitment on defense directionally, and these sorts of things to sort of, you show it to them, okay, the threat goes away. Since then, we're going to use economic force to force Canada to join the United States, talking about military force to go get Greenland away from Denmark, which is a founding member of NATO, and no one ever contemplated Article 5 being used internally, which is what this is. I mean, do the details of a plan even matter? It just seems like he sees tariffs as a way to generate revenue for the United States, and the details of what you do and what Justin Trudeau does or Pierre Poilievre does, I don't know if it matters.
You know, I think it's fair to say that part of this is part of the President's negotiating objective and strategy to create chaos and confusion in various foreign jurisdictions. Canada's a sovereign nation. It will remain so. We have a wonderful, solid, balanced trade relationship with the U.S., and we want to expand upon it. And the principle behind Fortress AMCAN is a belief that our strategy is based on integrated strategic energy alliance that serves the national and economic interests of Americans and, of course, the economic interests of our country. So we believe that is the obvious way forward. We believe it's in their interest. Like, look, China has said they're not selling critical minerals to the U.S. The United States does not have a domestic market or access to those resources. They need an ally. We are that ally. We have been, we will remain so. And I think that is a value proposition that is unique. They can't go to Ohio or Nevada to supply it. They need a foreign partner. And this is where Ontario is unique in our value prop.
I get it, and anyone who looks at the data and anyone who looks at it rationally agrees with you. And I'm sure the congressmen that you're talking to and some of the governors and the business groups, they all agree with you. But the constituency is one guy and a very small orbit around him, and they just keep raising the rhetoric to what would be comical levels if it wasn't so serious. So, I mean, do you have any indication? I know we saw Tom Homan, the borders czar, say he was pleased to see what Dominic LeBlanc put on the table. Right. Do you have any indication from anyone in the Trump orbit that they're hearing what Ontario has to say?
Well, I do think the incoming border czar did give some early indications of some incremental progress that is positive. Now, he did say, like the premiers are saying, the overall funding envelope is a positive step. They actually want to see it implemented, and so do the premiers. Premier Ford, who is the chair of the Federation, made that clear. This is a serious threat. This is not normative times in our geopolitics and a rules-based order. Even what's taking place in Panama and other jurisdictions, I think is discomforting for anyone in the world. But having said that, there's a recognition too that in President Trump, I think if he sees there is an economic interest for his nation with access to minerals, resources, and IP and other innovations that come from Canada, I do believe he will want to take advantage of that deal. And he's a deal maker. We see this before if it's in his interest. Well, we built a plan leading with America, Canada. The AMCAN strategy is about serving the economic needs of America with a reciprocal benefit for Ontario.
But he seems to look at that value proposition and says, I should just acquire it. He's looking at Canada like it's a Midtown Manhattan office tower.
I think we have to be serious. I mean, I hear you, and
I have no idea what to make of the guy.
I'm not discounting what I hear the same things, but I mean, it's like when the premier said, "Sure," and you know what? We'll do a counteroffer. We'll just pick up Alaska. Like I thought that was actually a pretty good line, but it's sort of like the tone of the room right now is let's get serious. We're not picking up California, Miss May. We're not.
We couldn't afford California. Let's be honest. But he sent his oldest kid to Greenland. Like Don Jr. went there. Donald Trump Jr. went there and met with people in red hats who want to join the United States. So it's almost like there's a manifest destiny revival happening, right?
Yeah.
So how do you even penetrate that with rational arguments like the ones you're making?
Look, I didn't think I'd wake up and see American imperialism back. But what I will say is let's not read too much into it. I mean, he has governed before. And he did have tariffs on Canadian goods, and it lasted 45 days. We had to make a real effort. Leaders, premiers led the way with a Team Canada approach, working with the feds to maximize pressure on decision makers. Let me assure you this, if they proceed and this 25% tariff comes down, we will respond in kind with surgical actions that will create pressure on decision makers and local economies that the president will hear. And I think the premier has got the attention. A subnational leader of Canada has got the attention of the free world, if you will. He's very aware of what we offer, what we have, and what they need. I think he wants a deal, and we're going to lean into that goodwill to deliver a deal that protects our jobs and fills really the national void of leadership we're seeing in the country, where the premier is stepping up, saying we've got to defend our jobs and supply chain.
No, look, and a lot of people are relieved to see him doing that and think his media appearances have been effective. But when he talks about a list of tariffs, as he said the other day, that he won't make public for strategic reasons, he's talking about suggestions to the federal government to impose those, right? I mean, I know you can do what you want to do with your energy supply, but you need the federal government to do this because you have no constitutional trade and foreign policy authority. That's what we're talking about here, right? Is getting the Trudeau government, such as it is, to do that. Right?
Some will be just federal unilateral actions, and some the provinces can recommend to them as well.
Yes, so but they have to do it,
there's
right?
There's a collaborative effort here, and the governments are working in good faith. But look, I mean, we need action. We have just around 10 days until the inauguration. And so time is of the essence, and I get there's a lot of drama and distractions going on in the city right now.
One or two.
But honest to God, nothing matters other than protecting these jobs, and hundreds of thousands of jobs across the country depend on the leadership of the current government, and they got to sort of wake up and refocus their efforts on deterring these tariffs that is existential to our economy.
So given that, just as the last question, Minister, 10, 12 days, whatever it is now until the inauguration, and then the tariff threat could be the 21st, we'll find out. We're going to this leadership process here with the Liberal Party to pick a new Prime Minister, and then probably a quick federal election.
Right.
Given all of that, the fact that could be tariffs, you can't have an early election in Ontario, can you?
Look, I think the priority for the immediate term certainly is getting these tariffs removed and defending the country. The Premier's been very clear that is what matters. So what seized the government, and I can tell you because I was on the phone with him last night at midnight and back on the phone with him all day today, that's what his priority is. It's building the list, coming up with mitigation, and defending the jobs, and making sure that should we need to invest tens of billions of dollars like we did during the pandemic, or like Prime Minister Harper had to do during the 08-09 recession, that we have a mandate from the people of Ontario. But I think the priority,
but does that mean does that mean an election to get the mandate to fight this tariff threat from Donald Trump? I mean, is that what you're talking about there? Having an election for that early?
I think the Premier is saying he wants us to stay focused on deterring these tariffs. That's the priority.
So that means no spring election.
What it means is this government is going to stay focused on that. I mean, David, look, nothing
Not
matters.
ruling it out means has everyone thinking you're going to do it, right?
Listen,
you know how it works.
You guys have been saying we're going to be doing this election
well, because
for a
you guys
year.
have been saying it,
Okay,
privately. So, like that's not you, but others in your government, right?
Our priority is making sure we build and strengthen our relationship with the U.S. We avoid these tariffs. We protect our jobs. That's what matters to the Premier. That's what matters to every member of his caucus. But ultimately, if we're looking at having to spend literally tens of billions of dollars in stimulus spending to backstop our supply chain while they're not getting contracts because of a tariff, then we do believe the people of Ontario need to give us a mandate on that.
Okay. Stephen Lecce, Minister of Energy and Electrification for the Government of Ontario. Thank you, sir. Good to see you. We're going to stay with our coverage of British Columbia because the Premier, David Eby, joins us now. Premier Eby, it's really good to see you again. Thanks for being here, sir.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Before we get into the discussion of Canada-U.S. relations, I wonder what's your reaction to what John Rustad is raising there today? Wants an inquiry based on what he considers to be irregularities. What's your response to the allegations he's making there?
Yeah, I mean, it's all a little bit cringe, I've got to say. If that's how he wants to spend his time, it's okay. It does have echoes of American-style politics that he's been trying to bring to our province, and I think it's unfortunate, but there's lots of safeguards. If there's anything to the allegations, Elections BC and the courts will do that review. I note, of course, that he is unwilling to put his own name to those allegations in the court applications, but his candidate will bring that forward and they'll be looked at as they should be.
Okay, a little bit cringe, so I'm guessing that means you're not too concerned about these alleged irregularities. Were they brought to you or your party, or is this just something you've learned about today from the Conservatives?
No, they were not brought to us, and in fact, there were repeated statements from Mr. Rustad that he accepted the election results. They had scrutineers there, on and on. It's a bit like a Leafs fan who says, if we only scored enough goals, we would have made it through the playoff round. In my opinion, if there's something serious, Elections BC and the courts will find it, and if not, we'll all be able to move on. Okay.
Well, let's move on in this conversation, Premier, because I presume you'll be coming in person for this meeting with the Prime Minister next week and the other premiers, something you've been asking for, this face-to-face sit-down with Justin Trudeau. Is there a clear consensus with the premiers on a course of action going into that meeting with the Prime Minister, or is this to sort of hash out a plan? Where are things?
Well, there's a couple components to it. I think that, first of all, in terms of the premiers across the country, we're all very much in line. We're working together. We're coordinating. The leadership, in my opinion, is coming from the premiers table, and I'm glad for that. There's a lot of turmoil in Ottawa right now. The second component, though, the important piece, is not just to reinforce for the federal government that we're there and we're doing that work and we're willing to do that work. We still do need the federal government to be there. These are completely unjustified tariffs. They're going to really hurt families in British Columbia, forestry families. Lots of families across the country are going to be hurting as a result of these tariffs, but not only that, in the United States as well. But the president-elect has raised the issue of the border. We need the federal government. I'm glad that Dom LeBlanc is staying in cabinet that can be that consistent voice around border-related issues and make sure that we're addressing issues proactively with the Americans during this time of transition federally. And so making sure that we're working together, even despite the turmoil with the Prime Minister's resignation, that we're able to get the job done for Canadians and for British Columbians.
You know, you've all been reaching out to people across the border, governors, senators, congressmen, business people, all of that. And I'm sure you're probably getting a reasonable reception from them as you make the rational, data-driven argument about the harm these tariffs will cause. But since all of this started, Trump is just escalating things with his rhetoric, talking about getting rid of the border, using economic force to coerce some sort of union between Canada and the United States. His musings about Greenland. I mean, are you worried that no matter what you do here, this guy is just not going to kind of listen to a rational, reasonable argument?
Well, we're certainly in British Columbia, and I know my colleagues across the country, we're taking the president-elect very seriously. In terms of the tariff threat, we're organizing internally in British Columbia. We've got business leadership, labor leadership. We're all coordinating together with our contacts south of the border. I've been reaching out to governors in the United States, the governors of Oregon and Washington, Colorado. Have been working with them in discussions about making sure that we're all on the same page. Now, you know, it's going to be an all-hands-on-deck approach. These are Democratic governors that I'm talking to. Danielle Smith next door in Alberta has a much more ready relationship with Republican governors. And so the benefit and the strength of the Premier team is that we're all bringing these contacts that we have to the table so that everybody's speaking with one voice. It doesn't make any sense for either Americans or for Canadians, this proposal, and we're really hopeful to drive that message home.
But do you know, Premier, if anyone at the Premier's table is getting into the orbit of Donald Trump, getting into that inner circle, right? Because I appreciate you can talk to Democratic governors, and I'm sure the Republican governors agree, but it seems like unless Donald Trump agrees, it's going to be tough. So is anybody getting close to the president-elect from from the Premier's table?
Yeah, some of my colleagues have had success in reaching out to key people. I know there have been efforts interpersonally with relationships that people have that are 1 or 2 degrees from the center. And I agree, you know, this is a challenging thing because the decisions are very much coming from the president-elect himself. And as is the agenda, we're hearing inconsistent messages from various decision makers about what he really means and what the intentions are going to be. So for our part in British Columbia, we're preparing, we're supporting the federal retaliation effort. We're identifying things that we can use to make this hurt for the Americans if they decide to go in this direction. Second, we're adapting and making sure our economy is ready to go, and we're expediting permit applications, and we're working closely with Alberta and with the territories around electricity and other ways we can work together to strengthen the Canadian economy without the Americans. And for the third part, we're diversifying our trade relationships and pushing hard because there are many countries that are being targeted, and we can work around the United States because of our position on the Pacific Ocean. Not all provinces are in that position, so we want to support them as well in getting their goods to market internationally.
You know, Premier Doug Ford has been pretty clear that he thinks the tariffs are coming. It's just a question of how you can shorten the duration of the tariffs by the response. Susan Holt, your colleague from New Brunswick, was on the show the other night and said pretty much the same thing. Where are you on that? Do you think it's an inevitability that there is a tariff from the United States incoming administration for at least some period of time, no matter what Canada does?
You know, I think as has been said so often in this recent period of time since the president-elect made that tweet, we need to prepare for the worst and we need to hope for the best. We are all preparing across the country for the tariffs to come into place. But certainly I'm hopeful that there's still opportunity to make this case because of the dramatic cost it's going to impose on Americans, even if you just talk about lumber and the cost of housing in the United States, or filling up the cars in the United States with gas that comes from Canada, or electricity that runs states that comes from Canadian provinces. This is a huge cost for Americans, and it will be a very big deal.
You're meeting with the Prime Minister next week, and you referenced the chaos in Ottawa earlier and talked about how the premiers are taking a leadership position on that. And I think it's, at minimum, the federal government has been distracted. How is that affecting this, do you think? Because Donald Trump seems dismissive of anything he hears from any political figure in Canada. You know, how do you think it has affected your ability to get the president to listen to what Canada has to say?
Well, I think that the core piece that we need to make sure is in place, and what is obviously a transition time in Ottawa right now, is we need to ensure a consistent presence throughout the period and independent of political parties. If there's going to be an election, there's going to be a new administration, there's definitely going to be a new prime minister, regardless of what happens, that there's somebody who's able to carry on this work whether it's work on the border, whether it's relationships and engagement with the United States, negotiation with key people. That consistency is going to be absolutely critical, so we're not carrying on work and then losing it and having to pick it up again. And British Columbians, Canadians are counting on us to be able to respond to this, even despite the political challenges that are happening in Ottawa, and having that consistent presence for those families, representing them to DC, to the president-elect, is going to be absolutely critical.
So what do you hope comes out of the meeting next week? I mean, I know based on what Premier Ford had said, I believe it was yesterday, that you've got pretty much a list of targets you're going to put on the table for retaliatory tariffs and sanctions from the federal government. They have identified some things they want to focus on. Is it just that, or are there more components to what you want to come out of this meeting as a united plan from the First Minister's table?
Well, for myself going to that table, I'm going to be looking to a few things. One is obviously a reassurance that the federal government has that consistent presence that I talked about, that we're not going to drop the ball as it's handed between various people in Ottawa. The second is that there's going to be that support for the provinces and territories in the event that tariffs come in for workers and families who are affected, that we're all going to work together in a coordinated way on that. That to avoid the tariffs, we have an integrated and a comprehensive plan about the border, so the province can pitch in wherever we can to support that national effort to address the border issues that have been raised. Not that they justify the tariffs, but to address them. And finally, to make sure that we have that regular point of communication as we organize internally in British Columbia so that we're part of a coordinated national effort. It still is a key role for the federal government to be there to support that coordination, given the nation-to-nation relationship between Canada and the United States. And so there's a bunch of things that I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to canvass and make sure are in place to address this very serious threat to Canadians and Americans alike.
Okay, I have one more question. I'm not sure if you bite, but we'll see. As the Liberals sort through the chaos, one of the names being floated as a candidate for sure, and maybe as a possible leader, is Christy Clark. You're one of your predecessors as the Premier of British Columbia from the British Columbia Liberal Party. May it rest in peace. I mean, what are your thoughts about a possible Christy Clark candidacy for the federal leadership?
Yeah, Ms. Clark and I were in different political parties when she ran here provincially. That party doesn't exist anymore. I understand she is considering a run in Ottawa. One really positive thing I can say about her candidacy is too often British Columbia gets forgotten in Ottawa. There's a lot of thought about Ontario and a lot of thought about Quebec. There is not a lot of thought about Western Canada, and so for her to be part of that discussion and those debates at the federal level would be very helpful. It'll force the other candidates as well to think about British Columbia and what their plans are for Western Canada, and I would really welcome that.
Well, Premier David Eby, we always welcome you on the show when you want to talk about British Columbia issues. We appreciate it. That's BC Premier David Eby. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.